After years of caring for her mother with Alzheimer's, she found a hidden letter. What it revealed was a decades-old family secret. Hello, welcome, leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. She had spent years tending to her mother, watching as the vibrant woman she once knew slowly faded into the fog of Alzheimer's. Day after day, she endured the heartbreak, the confusion, the endless cycle of caring for someone who no longer remembered her face. But on this particular afternoon, as she sorted through old boxes in the attic, she stumbled upon something that would change everything. A letter, hidden away for decades, buried in the past. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her heart pounding in her chest. What could be so important that it was kept from her all these years? The words on the page were like a dagger to her heart. As she read, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet, her entire world upended by the secrets her mother had carried silently for so long. How could she have lived all these years without knowing? What was her mother hiding? And why now, after all this time? The answers lay just beyond her grasp, buried in the lines of that old, yellowed paper. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The golden rays of the late August sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting intricate shadows across the worn hardwood floor of Evelyn's bedroom. Sarah Matthews, a woman in her early 40s with prematurely graying hair and tired eyes, methodically folded her mother's laundry, each crease a testament to years of repetitive care. Evelyn sat in her favorite armchair by the window, her once vibrant blue eyes now clouded with confusion as she stared vacantly at the swaying branches of the old oak tree outside. Her fingers, gnarled by arthritis, absently plucked at the frayed edge of her faded floral house dress. "Mom, do you want some lemonade?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with forced cheerfulness. Evelyn didn't respond, lost in the fog of Alzheimer's that had slowly consumed her mind over the past 5 years. Sarah sighed, a sound heavy with exhaustion and unspoken grief. She moved to the dresser, carefully arranging her mother's clothes in the drawers she had organized countless times before. As she pushed the last drawer closed, a muffled thud caught her attention. Frowning, Sarah knelt down, her knees protesting after years of caring for her increasingly dependent mother. She reached under the dresser, her fingers brushing against something solid. With a gentle tug, she pulled out a small, ornate wooden box, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. "What's this, Mom?" Sarah asked, more out of habit than expectation of an answer. Evelyn remained silent, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window. Sarah's heart quickened as she carefully opened the box. Inside, nestled among faded photographs and trinkets, lay a yellowed envelope. With trembling fingers, she extracted the letter, its paper brittle with age. As Sarah unfolded the delicate pages, her eyes widened, scanning the faded handwriting. The first lines hit her like a physical blow. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means I've kept my promise to stay away. But I need you to know that walking away from you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Our love was real, pure, and beautiful, everything the world tried to tell us it couldn't be." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she continued reading, each word shattering the foundations of everything she thought she knew about her family. The letter spoke of a forbidden love between her mother and a man named Marcus, a love that transcended the racial barriers of 1960s America. It told of secret meetings, desperate plans to escape together, and the heart-wrenching choice Evelyn ultimately made to save Sarah's Uncle James from a dangerous situation rooted in the racial tensions of the time. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she read the final lines. "I will always love you, Evelyn. The sacrifice you've made for your family is a testament to the strength of your character. I only hope that someday, the world will be a place where love like ours isn't forced into the shadows. Forever yours, Marcus." Sarah's hands shook as she lowered the letter, her mind reeling. She turned to look at her mother, seeing her in an entirely new light. How much pain had Evelyn carried silently all these years? How many dreams had she sacrificed? "Oh, Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "What did you do?" At that moment, Evelyn turned from the window, her eyes briefly clearing as they met Sarah's tear-stained face. For a fleeting second, a spark of recognition flickered in her gaze. "Marcus," Evelyn murmured, her voice fragile and hopeful. The name hung in the air between them, heavy with decades of unspoken longing. Then, as quickly as it had come, the moment of lucidity passed. Evelyn's eyes clouded over once more, and she returned to her silent contemplation of the world outside. Sarah clutched the letter to her chest, her mind racing. Who was Marcus? What really happened all those years ago? And how had this secret shaped the family she thought she knew? As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah realized that her world had irrevocably changed. The truth hidden in this dusty box had set in motion a journey that would unravel decades of secrets, challenge everything she believed about love and sacrifice, and force her to confront the complex legacy of race in America. With one last look at her mother's serene face, Sarah made a silent vow. She would uncover the full story, no matter the cost. For Evelyn's sake, for Marcus's memory, and for her own understanding of the family that had been built on this monumental secret. As darkness fell, Sarah carefully refolded the letter, placing it back in its hiding place. Tomorrow, she would begin her search for answers. But for now, she sat beside her mother, taking Evelyn's frail hand in hers, and watched as the last light of day faded, marking the end of a life she thought she knew and the dawn of a journey into her family's hidden past. The morning sun had barely begun to warm the dew-covered grass when Sarah's car pulled into the driveway of a modest suburban home in Richmond, Virginia. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the crumpled letter from yesterday tucked securely in her jacket pocket. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the car and approached the front door. Before she could knock, the door swung open, revealing James Matthews, her uncle, a man in his late 60s with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who had seen too much. His eyes, sharp despite his age, immediately registered Sarah's distress. "Sarah? What's wrong? Is it Evelyn?" he asked, concern etching deeper lines into his forehead. Sarah shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk, Uncle James. It's about Mom and Marcus." The color drained from James's face at the mention of that name. He stepped back, wordlessly inviting Sarah inside. The living room was a testament to James's life, photos of his days on the police force, his late wife smiling from silver frames, and mementos from a life of service to his community. As they sat down, Sarah pulled out the letter with trembling hands. "I found this yesterday," she said, watching her uncle's reaction carefully. "It's from someone named Marcus. To Mom. Talks about a love they shared and a sacrifice she made. For you." James closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging as if a great weight had suddenly been placed upon them. When he opened them again, they were filled with a mixture of pain and resignation. "I always wondered if this day would come," he said softly. "I hoped it wouldn't, that we could let the past stay buried." Sarah leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Uncle James, please. I need to know. What happened? Who was Marcus?" James stood up abruptly, walking to a cabinet in the corner. He returned with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, pouring a generous amount into each. "If we're going to talk about this, we're going to need it," he said, handing a glass to Sarah. As Sarah took a sip, the burn of the alcohol matching the fire of curiosity and apprehension in her chest, James began to speak. "It was the summer of '63, he started, his voice taking on a distant quality. "I was young, stupid, and angry at the world. Got mixed up with some bad folks who thought they were protecting our way of life." Sarah listened, transfixed, as James recounted a tale of racial tensions, misguided loyalties, and a fateful night that changed everything. "There was a civil rights march planned," James continued, his voice heavy with regret. "Me and some others, we decided to teach them a lesson. But it went too far. A young black man got hurt bad. Real bad." James paused, taking a long drink from his glass. "That man was Marcus's brother." Sarah gasped, the pieces starting to fall into place. "And Mom? Where does she fit in?" "Your mother?" James said, a sad smile crossing his face. She was braver than all of us put together. She'd been seeing Marcus in secret for months. When she found out what happened, she came to me, begging me to turn myself in. The weight of the revelation hung in the air between them. Sarah's mind raced, trying to reconcile this new information with the mother she thought she knew. "But you didn't," Sarah said softly, realization dawning. "She protected you." James nodded, shame evident in every line of his face. "She made a deal. She'd break things off with Marcus, keep quiet about what happened, if I promised to leave that life behind, to become someone who protected people instead of hurting them." Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at the police commendations on the wall with new understanding. "That's why you became a cop." "Spent the rest of my life trying to make up for that night," James confirmed. "But Evelyn, she paid the real price. She gave up the love of her life to save me from my own stupidity." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as the full impact of her mother's sacrifice hit her. "Did she ever see Marcus again?" James shook his head. "Not as far as I know, but I saw the way she'd look at mixed-race couples over the years. The sadness in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. She never stopped loving him, Sarah. Never." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, Sarah and James sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The revelation had shaken Sarah to her core, forcing her to reevaluate everything she thought she knew about her family. "What do I do now, Uncle James?" Sarah asked, her voice small and uncertain. James reached out, clasping her hand in his. "You honor her sacrifice by understanding it, Sarah. And maybe it's time we both tried to make things right." As Sarah left her uncle's house that evening, her head spinning with revelations and unanswered questions, she knew that this was only the beginning. The truth about her mother's past was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and Sarah was determined to piece together the full story, no matter where it might lead her. Driving home in the fading light, Sarah made a silent promise to her mother. She would uncover the truth, confront the past, and perhaps, in doing so, find a way to heal the wounds that had shaped her family for generations. Little did Sarah know that her journey was about to take her deeper into a web of secrets, love, and racial tensions that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her family, her community, and herself. The gentle hum of fluorescent lights filled the Richmond Public Library as Sarah hunched over a microfiche reader, her eyes straining to decipher the faded newsprint from 1963. She had been here for hours, searching for any mention of the civil rights march her uncle had spoken about, hoping to find a thread that would lead her to Marcus. Suddenly, a headline caught her eye. "Civil rights demonstration turns violent. Local man seriously injured." Sarah's heart raced as she quickly scanned the article, her breath catching when she saw the name. "Thomas Jackson, 24, remains in critical condition." Jackson, Sarah whispered to herself. Could this be Marcus's brother? As she jotted down notes, a shadow fell across her desk. Sarah looked up to see an elderly African-American woman watching her with curious eyes. "You've been staring at those old papers for hours, child," the woman said, her voice gentle but tinged with something Sarah couldn't quite place. "What is it you're looking for?" Sarah hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "I'm trying to find information about a man named Marcus. He would have been involved in the civil rights movement here in the 60s. His brother was injured in a march." The woman's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "Marcus Jackson?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's heart leapt. "You knew him?" The woman nodded slowly, glancing around before pulling up a chair. "My name's Dorothy. I was there that day at the march. I knew Marcus and Thomas. We all did." Over the next hour, Dorothy painted a vivid picture of Richmond in the 1960s. The tension, the hope, the danger that came with fighting for equality. She spoke of Marcus with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "Marcus was a dreamer," Dorothy said, her eyes distant with memory. "He believed that love could conquer all, even in those dark times. We all thought he was naive, until we saw him with your mother." Sarah gasped. You knew about my mom and Marcus? Dorothy nodded, a sad smile on her face. Child, in our community, a love like that doesn't go unnoticed. They were careful, but we saw the way they looked at each other. It was like they were the only two people in the world. As Dorothy continued, Sarah learned of secret meetings in the back of a small jazz club, of whispered plans for a future together, of the hope and fear that characterized their relationship. But most of all, she learned of the depth of their love, a love that defied the societal norms of the time. The night of the march changed everything, Dorothy said, her voice growing heavy. Thomas was hurt bad. Marcus was devastated, angry. He wanted justice. Sarah leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. What happened? Dorothy's eyes met Sarah's, filled with a mixture of pain and understanding. Your mother came to him, begging him not to seek revenge. She told him about her brother's involvement, about the deal she'd made. Marcus was heartbroken, but he understood the impossible choice Evelyn had made. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she imagined her mother's anguish, the weight of the decision she had been forced to make. Did they ever see each other again? Sarah asked. Dorothy shook her head. Not as far as I know. Marcus left town soon after. Last I heard, he'd moved up north. But Sarah? She paused, reaching out to grasp Sarah's hand. He never stopped loving your mother, and I don't think she ever stopped loving him. As the library lights flickered, signaling closing time, Sarah thanked Dorothy profusely, exchanging contact information. She left with a heavy heart but a renewed sense of purpose. Driving home, Sarah's mind raced with all she had learned. The sacrifices her mother had made, the love she had given up, the secrets she had carried for decades. It was almost too much to bear. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah noticed a car she didn't recognize parked on the street. A man stood on her porch, his face hidden in shadow. Her heart pounding, Sarah approached cautiously. Can I help you? She called out. The man stepped into the light, and Sarah gasped. He was older, with graying hair and lines etched deep into his face, but his eyes, they were startlingly familiar. My name is Michael Jackson, the man said, his voice deep and tinged with emotion. I believe you've been looking for information about my uncle Marcus. Sarah stood frozen, the weight of this new revelation washing over her. As she stared into Michael's eyes that could have been her mother's, she realized that her journey into the past was far from over. In fact, it was about to take an unexpected and dramatic turn. Please, Sarah said, finding her voice at last. Come inside. We have a lot to talk about. As they entered the house, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the brink of uncovering a truth that would change everything. Not just for her, but for all those touched by the star-crossed love of Evelyn and Marcus. The living room was bathed in the warm glow of a table lamp as Sarah and Michael sat across from each other, the weight of decades of secrets hanging between them. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she poured 2 cups of coffee, the rich aroma doing little to calm her racing heart. I'm sorry for showing up unannounced, Michael began, his deep voice tinged with nervousness. But when I heard someone was asking questions about Uncle Marcus, I had to come. Sarah nodded, studying the man before her. Michael was in his late 50s, with kind eyes that reminded her so much of her mother's it made her chest ache. How did you find out I was looking into this? Michael smiled softly. Small communities have long memories, Ms. Matthews. Word travels fast, especially when it concerns a story many thought was long buried. As the night wore on, Michael shared what he knew of his uncle's story, a tale of love, loss, and the lasting impact of choices made in the face of societal pressure. Sarah listened, tears welling in her eyes as she learned of the depth of Marcus's feelings for her mother. Uncle Marcus never married, Michael said, his voice soft with empathy. He'd say that he'd already met the love of his life, and no one else could compare. Sarah's voice cracked as she asked, Did he ever try to contact my mother again? Michael hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small, worn envelope. He wrote this letter years ago, said that if anything ever happened to him, I was to make sure it reached Evelyn. With trembling hands, Sarah took the envelope. Her mother's name was written on the front in an elegant script. Why didn't he send it? Fear, I think, Michael replied. Fear of disrupting the life Evelyn had built, of causing her pain. But mostly, I think he was honoring the sacrifice she made. As Sarah carefully opened the letter, the room seemed to fade away. Her mother's voice, clear and strong as it had been before Alzheimer'S stole it away, echoed in her mind as she read, "My dearest Evelyn, time has passed, but my love for you remains unchanged. I've lived a life as I hope you have, but there hasn't been a day when I haven't thought of you, of the future we once dreamed of. I want you to know that I understand why you made the choice you did. Your bravery in facing an impossible decision only made me love you more. I hope you found happiness, my love. You deserve nothing less. If our paths never cross again in this life, know that you will always be the best part of me. The world may not have been ready for our love, but perhaps, in sharing our story, future generations can learn and grow. Forever yours, Marcus." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she finished reading. The room was silent save for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. "There's more," Michael said softly, breaking the silence. He pulled out a small flash drive from his pocket. Uncle Marcus recorded a video testimony before he passed away last year. He wanted to ensure that the full story was told, that the sacrifices made by both him and Evelyn wouldn't be forgotten. Sarah stared at the flash drive, her mind reeling. "He's gone," she whispered, a fresh wave of grief washing over her for a man she had never met, but whose love had shaped her entire life. Michael nodded solemnly. "He lived a good life, Miss Matthews, but he never stopped loving your mother." As Sarah inserted the flash drive into her laptop, her hands shaking, she felt as though she was standing on the precipice of a truth that would forever change her understanding of family, love, and the long shadow cast by the past. The screen flickered to life, and Sarah found herself looking into the face of Marcus older, but with eyes that still sparkled with the same love and determination she had seen in the old photographs. As he began to speak, his voice strong despite his age, Sarah knew that the story she was about to hear would reshape not just her family's history, but her entire worldview. "My name is Marcus Jackson," the voice from the past began. "And this is the story of a love that defied its time, and the sacrifices made in its name." As the testimony unfolded, Sarah and Michael sat transfixed, bearing witness to a love story that spanned decades, transcended racial barriers, and spoke to the enduring power of the human heart. With each revelation, each piece of the puzzle falling into place, Sarah felt a growing determination to ensure that her mother's sacrifice and Marcus's unwavering love would not be in vain. As the video came to an end, Sarah turned to Michael, her eyes shining with a mixture of tears and resolve. "We need to tell their story," she said, her voice firm. "For Mom, for Marcus, and for all those who have faced impossible choices in the name of love." Michael nodded, reaching out to squeeze Sarah's hand. "Together," he said, "we'll make sure their love is remembered." As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Sarah and Michael set out to piece together the full story of Evelyn and Marcus. A tale of love, sacrifice, and the long arc of justice bending towards hope. Little did they know that their quest for truth would soon unveil even more shocking family secrets and force them to confront the lingering shadows of America's racial past. The early morning mist clung to the abandoned jazz club like a shroud, its faded facade a ghost of its former glory. Sarah stood before it, Michael at her side, both lost in the weight of the moment. This was where it all began, where Evelyn and Marcus had first locked eyes across a smoke-filled room, where forbidden love had blossomed against all odds. "You sure you want to do this?" Michael asked softly, concern etched on his face. Sarah nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I need to see it, to feel it, to understand." As they stepped inside, the musty air enveloped them, decades of dust swirling in the weak sunlight filtering through boarded-up windows. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the empty space as she made her way to the stage, her mind's eye filling the room with the vibrancy of its past, the smooth notes of a saxophone, the clink of glasses, the hushed whispers of secret lovers. "This is where they first met," Sarah murmured, her fingers trailing along the edge of the stage. "Mom told me once that she heard the most beautiful music here, but I never understood what she meant. Now I do." Michael nodded, his eyes distant. Uncle Marcus said he knew the moment he saw her that his life would never be the same. As they explored the abandoned club, Sarah's foot caught on something protruding from beneath a floorboard. Kneeling down, she pried it loose, revealing a small, tarnished locket. With trembling hands, Sarah opened it, gasping at what she found inside. On one side was a faded photo of her mother, young and radiant. On the other, words were etched in tiny script, "My heart, always, M." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as the full weight of her mother's sacrifice hit her anew. This locket, hidden away for decades, was tangible proof of a love that had endured despite impossible odds. "She must have left it here," Sarah whispered, clutching the locket to her chest. A piece of her heart, hidden away where she could never reclaim it. Michael placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, a testament to their love and to the choice she made. As they left the club, the locket safely tucked in Sarah's pocket, a new determination filled her. "We need to tell their story, Michael. Not just for Mom and Marcus, but for everyone who's ever had to choose between love and duty, between the heart and the world's expectations." Michael nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It won't be easy. There are people who'd prefer the past stay buried." "I know," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "But Mom and Marcus deserved better. They all did, everyone who suffered because of hate and fear. It's time for the truth to come out." As they drove back to Sarah's house, the weight of their mission settled over them. They knew that bringing this story to light would mean confronting painful truths, not just about Evelyn and Marcus, but about the community and the country as a whole. Back at home, Sarah carefully placed the locket next to the letters and the flash drive, pieces of a puzzle that was slowly coming together. As she stared at these artifacts of a love lost to time and circumstance, a plan began to form in her mind. "We need to find everyone who knew them," she said, turning to Michael with fierce determination. "Everyone who was part of their story. It's time to break the silence." Michael nodded, understanding the magnitude of what Sarah was proposing. "It won't be easy. Some wounds never fully heal." "I know," Sarah replied softly, "but it's the only way to honor their sacrifice, to make sure it wasn't in vain." As the day wore on, Sarah and Michael began the painstaking process of piecing together Evelyn and Marcus's story. They pored over old newspapers, made phone calls to aging relatives, and sought out anyone who might have known the star-crossed lovers. With each new piece of information, each fragment of memory shared by those who remembered, the true depth of Evelyn and Marcus's love and the enormity of their sacrifice became clearer. But as they delved deeper into the past, they began to uncover other secrets, other stories of love and loss that had been hidden away for decades. The tale of Evelyn and Marcus was just the beginning, a thread that, once pulled, began to unravel a complex tapestry of race, love, and the long shadow of America's troubled history. As night fell, Sarah stood at her window, the locket clutched in her hand, staring out at the quiet street. She thought of her mother, lost in the fog of Alzheimer's, and of Marcus, who had lived his entire life carrying the weight of a love he could never fully express. "I'll make it right, Mom," she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "For you, for Marcus, for all of us. Your story will be told." Little did Sarah know that her quest for truth would soon lead her to confront not just the ghosts of the past, but the very real and dangerous consequences of unearthing long-buried secrets. As she prepared to dive deeper into her investigation, forces were already aligning to ensure that some truths remained hidden, no matter the cost. The tension in the Matthews family living room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah stood before her assembled relatives, her Uncle James seated in an armchair, his face a mask of apprehension. Cousins, aunts, and distant relations filled every available space, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "I've called you all here because it's time we face the truth about our family's past," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. As Sarah recounted the story of Evelyn and Marcus, the room erupted into chaos. Voices raised in anger, disbelief, and shock. "You're dragging up ancient history," Aunt Meredith shouted, her face flushed. "What good can come of this?" "It's a lie," Cousin Robert interjected. "Grandma Evelyn would never." "It's all true." James's quiet voice cut through the din. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "Every word of it. And it's time we stopped running from our past." Sarah watched as the impact of James's confirmation rippled through the room. Some family members wept openly, while others sat in stunned silence. "But why now?" Sarah's cousin Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Why dig all this up after so many years?" Sarah's gaze swept the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "Because the past isn't just the past. It shapes who we are, the choices we make. Mom and Marcus's story isn't just about them. It's about all of us, and the world we live in." As the discussion continued, heated at times, raw emotions bubbled to the surface. Old resentments and long-held secrets began to emerge, painting a complex picture of a family shaped by the forces of history and the choices made in its wake. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" James asked Sarah quietly as the family argued around them. "The doors you're opening?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I know it's not easy, Uncle James, but it's necessary. For Mom, for Marcus, for all of us." As the confrontation reached its peak, Sarah's phone buzzed insistently. Stepping away from the fray, she answered to hear Michael's urgent voice. "Sarah, we've got a problem," he said, his tone grave. "Someone broke into my house. They were looking for something, and I think I know what." Sarah's blood ran cold. "The video testimony? And anything else related to Uncle Marcus and your mother?" Michael confirmed. "This isn't just about family secrets anymore, Sarah. There are people out there who want this story buried." As Sarah ended the call, she turned back to her family, seeing them with new eyes. Who among them might have connections to those seeking to keep the past hidden? Who might be willing to go to extreme lengths to protect old secrets? "We need to talk," she announced, her voice cutting through the ongoing arguments. "All of us, because this isn't just about Mom and Marcus anymore. There are forces at work here bigger than our family, and we need to decide where we stand." As Sarah laid out what Michael had told her, she watched the reactions of her family members carefully. Shock, fear, and in some faces a flicker of something that might have been guilt or knowledge. "This is exactly why we should let sleeping dogs lie," Aunt Meredith insisted, her voice shrill with panic. "No," Sarah countered firmly. "This is exactly why we need to bring the truth to light. Whatever's hidden in our past, whatever forces are working to keep it buried, it's time we faced it head-on." As the family debated their next move, alliances shifting and reforming with each new revelation, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. She had started this journey seeking answers about her mother's past, but now she found herself at the center of a storm that threatened to upend not just her family, but perhaps the entire community. "Whatever we decide," James said, rising to stand beside Sarah, "we do it together, as a family." Sarah nodded, grateful for her uncle's support. As she looked around the room at the faces of her relatives, some supportive, some fearful, some still angry, she knew that the real battle was just beginning. "Together," she agreed, her voice strong with conviction, "because the truth is worth fighting for, no matter the cost." As the family meeting stretched into the night, plans were made and secrets shared. But even as they worked to present a united front, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there were still hidden currents at work, forces both within and outside the family that would stop at nothing to keep the past buried. With each decision made, each truth uncovered, Sarah felt herself being drawn deeper into a web of long-buried secrets and present-day dangers. The journey that had begun with a hidden letter was now leading her into uncharted territory, where the lines between past and present, right and wrong, were increasingly blurred. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the room, Sarah stood at the window, watching the world wake up. She knew that the day ahead would bring new challenges, new revelations, and perhaps new dangers. But she was ready to face them, armed with the truth and the strength of those who stood beside her. The story of Evelyn and Marcus was far from over. In fact, Sarah realized it was only the beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the town square as Sarah stood before the gathered crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. Cameras flashed, and reporters jostled for position, their eager faces a mix of curiosity and anticipation. This was it, the moment of truth. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the faces before her. She saw her family members, some supportive, others still wary. Michael stood to her left, a pillar of strength. And there, in the back, sitting in her wheelchair with a nurse by her side, was Evelyn, her eyes vacant but her presence a poignant reminder of why they were all here. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm here today to share a story of love, sacrifice, and the long shadow cast by our nation's history of racial injustice." As Sarah recounted the tale of Evelyn and Marcus, a hush fell over the crowd. She spoke of their forbidden love, of the impossible choice Evelyn had made, and of the ripple effects that had shaped not just their family, but the entire community for decades. "This isn't just about my mother and Marcus," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "It's about all of us, the choices we make, the secrets we keep, and the price we pay for silence." As she spoke, Sarah could see the impact of her words. Tears streamed down faces in the crowd. Old-timers nodded solemnly, recognition dawning in their eyes. Younger listeners leaned in, captivated by a history they'd never known. But it wasn't just the story that held their attention. Sarah had come prepared. On a large screen behind her, images began to appear, old photographs, letters, documents. The video testimony of Marcus played, his aged face and emotional words bringing his presence to life. "We can't change the past," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "But we can learn from it. We can acknowledge the pain, the injustice, and the love that persevered despite it all. And in doing so, maybe we can build a better future." As Sarah concluded her speech, the square erupted in a cacophony of voices. Questions flew from all directions, emotions ran high, and decades of buried truths burst into the open. Amidst the chaos, Sarah noticed movement near the back of the crowd. Evelyn, who had been silent and unresponsive for so long, was stirring in her wheelchair. As Sarah watched in amazement, her mother's eyes cleared, focusing on the images on the screen. "Marcus," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible above the crowd's murmur. Sarah rushed to her mother's side, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, can you hear me?" Evelyn turned to Sarah, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Sarah, my sweet girl, I'm so sorry. I should have told you." "It's okay, Mom," Sarah soothed, clasping her mother's frail hand. "I understand now. We all do." As mother and daughter shared this moment of connection, the crowd around them fell silent, bearing witness to a reconciliation decades in the making. But the day's revelations were far from over. As the initial shock of Sarah's announcement wore off, more people began to come forward. Old-timers shared long-held secrets. Families spoke of their own experiences with racial injustice and forbidden love. The story of Evelyn and Marcus had opened a floodgate of truth. James stepped forward, his face etched with remorse as he publicly acknowledged his role in the events of the past. "I can't change what I did," he said, his voice breaking. "But I can stand here today and say I was wrong. And I'm sorry." As the day wore on, the town square became a place of confession, forgiveness, and healing. Old grudges were aired and put to rest. Hidden connections were revealed. The complex tapestry of the town's history, with all its dark threads and moments of light, was laid bare for all to see. But even as a spirit of reconciliation swept through the crowd, Sarah couldn't shake a feeling of unease. She noticed furtive glances and hushed conversations on the fringes of the gathering. Not everyone, it seemed, was ready to embrace the truth. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the square, Sarah stood once more before the crowd. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We've taken the first step towards healing, but there's still much work to be done." The crowd murmured in agreement, a mix of anticipation and apprehension in their voices. They all knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that confronting the past would bring both pain and hope. As the gathering began to disperse, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Michael, his eyes shining with a mix of pride and concern. "You did it," he said softly. "You told their story." Sarah nodded, a bittersweet smile on her face. "We told their story," she corrected, "but I have a feeling it's far from over." As they walked together towards Evelyn, who was being tended to by the nurse, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that while one chapter had closed, another was just beginning. The truth was out there now, impossible to ignore or bury again. But with truth came consequences, and as Sarah looked out over the town she'd known all her life, she realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The legacy of Evelyn and Marcus's love had set in motion changes that would ripple through their community for years to come. As the last light of day faded, Sarah took her mother's hand, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The past had been unveiled, but the future, with all its uncertainty and promise, was yet to be written. The soft beeping of hospital monitors filled the room as Sarah sat beside her mother's bed, holding Evelyn's frail hand. The events of the past few weeks had taken their toll, and Evelyn's brief moment of lucidity in the town square had given way to a rapid decline. "It's okay, Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You can rest now. We told your story. People know the truth." As if hearing her daughter's words, Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, a spark of recognition lighting up her face. "Sarah," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "My brave girl." Sarah leaned in closer, her heart racing. "Mom, can you hear me?" Evelyn's grip on Sarah's hand tightened slightly. "Marcus," she murmured, "I never stopped loving him. Tell him I'm sorry." "He knew, Mom," Sarah assured her, tears now flowing freely. "He loved you too, always." A peaceful smile spread across Evelyn's face. "Thank you," she whispered, and with those final words, Evelyn Matthews closed her eyes for the last time, leaving behind a legacy of love, sacrifice, and newfound truth. The days that followed were a blur of grief and unexpected support. The story of Evelyn and Marcus had touched hearts across the community, and people from all walks of life came to pay their respects. Even those who had initially resisted the revelations seemed moved by the depth of Evelyn's sacrifice. On the day of the funeral, the old church was packed to capacity. Sarah stood at the pulpit, looking out over a sea of faces, family, friends, and strangers alike, all united in honoring Evelyn's memory. "My mother lived her life carrying a weight that none of us could have imagined," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her sorrow. "She made a choice born of love for her family, love for Marcus, and love for a future she hoped would be better than the past." As Sarah spoke, she noticed Michael slipping into the back of the church, a folder clutched tightly in his hands. Their eyes met briefly, and he nodded, a silent message passing between them. "But Evelyn's story didn't end with her sacrifice," Sarah continued. "It lives on in all of us, in the truths we've faced, the connections we've made, and the changes we're working towards." After the service, as the mourners filed out of the church, Michael approached Sarah. "I found something," he said quietly, handing her the folder. "It was hidden in one of Uncle Marcus's old jazz records. I think you need to see it." Sarah opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper, a deed to a piece of property on the outskirts of town. And beside it, a letter in Marcus's handwriting. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then the world has changed enough for our story to be told. This land was meant to be our future, a place where we could live freely, without fear or judgment. I never sold it, always hoping that someday, somehow, we might find our way back to each other. Now, I leave it in your hands. Use it to build the future we once dreamed of, a future of love, acceptance, and hope. Forever yours, Marcus. Sarah looked up at Michael, her eyes wide with surprise and a glimmer of hope. He kept it all these years, she breathed. But why didn't he tell us in his video testimony? Michael shook his head, a sad smile on his face. I think he wanted to make sure the story was told for the right reasons, not for any potential gain. This was his final gift to Evelyn and to all of us. As they stood there, the weight of this new revelation settling over them, Sarah felt a sense of purpose stirring within her. We need to do something with this land, she said, determination filling her voice. Something that honors Mom and Marcus and helps heal the wounds in our community. Over the following months, Sarah worked tirelessly to bring her vision to life. The property that Marcus had held onto for so long became the site of the Evelyn and Marcus Center for Reconciliation and Hope. It was a place where people could come together to learn, to share their stories, and to work towards a more just and loving community. On the day of the center's opening, Sarah stood before another crowd, this one filled with faces both familiar and new. As she cut the ribbon, she felt the presence of her mother and Marcus, their love and sacrifice woven into the very fabric of this place. This center is not just a building, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. It's a testament to the power of love to overcome hatred, of truth to heal wounds, and of hope to light the way forward. It's a living legacy of two people who dared to love in a time of division, and whose story continues to inspire us today. As the crowd applauded and people began to explore the new center, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. The journey that had begun with a hidden letter had led her here, to a place of healing, of truth, and of new beginnings. She knew that there would still be challenges ahead. Change never comes easily, and there were still those who resisted the new openness in their community. But as Sarah watched people of all backgrounds coming together, sharing stories and forming connections, she knew that her mother and Marcus would be proud. Their love, once hidden away, had become a beacon of hope for an entire community. And in that light, Sarah saw the promise of a better future, one built on understanding, acceptance, and the enduring power of love. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the new center, Sarah walked to a quiet corner of the property. There, beneath an old oak tree, stood two benches facing each other. On one was engraved, Evelyn. On the other, Marcus. Sarah sat down on her mother's bench, closing her eyes and feeling the gentle breeze on her face. In that moment, she could almost hear the faint strains of jazz music, could almost see her mother and Marcus, young and in love, dancing in the fading light. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, "for your love, your sacrifice, and for showing us the way." And as night fell on this new chapter in their town's history, Sarah knew that the legacy of Evelyn and Marcus would continue to guide them, a testament to the enduring power of love to change hearts, heal wounds, and build a better world. Thank you very much for listening to this story. Comment below what you thought of the ending and from which city you're listening to us. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, click on the next story that's appearing on your screen now. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories together. See you soon.